I'm Helen Wagner, granddaughter of Sir Hugh Dow, who founded the Dow Medical College in Karachi, Pakistan in 1945. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my grandfather from personal memories of him and also things that my mother and my father also told me about him. Yes, so my grandfather was born in London, and so he has Scottish ancestors because Dow is a Scottish name, but actually he himself grew up in London, and he was very good at school, so he won scholarships, and he went to the University College in London, and then he went on to join the Indian Civil Service and worked his way up through various positions with different financial responsibilities, and finally became governor of Sindh, which includes Karachi, which is where the Dow Medical College is situated. There's an interesting story about the founding of this Dow Medical College because my grandfather didn't actually want it to be named after him. He thought it should be named after the Minister of Health, but the Minister of Health insisted that it be named after my grandfather, which is quite funny. Have these two important people neither wanting the place to be named after themselves. But for me, this wasn't very surprising when I heard that because it fits with my grandfather's character, because actually he never really was the type of person who wanted to push himself forward. He just worked his way up through the ranks in the Indian civil service because he was clever and because he could do the job well, and he was liked and he was responsible. My grandmother Anne had been a childhood friend of his, and they ended up getting married in 1913, and she went out to join him in India, and they had a daughter, Dorothea, who ended up marrying an Australian doctor and going out to Australia, and then my father, who was called Hugh Peter but known as Peter. My father actually told me that he had to go to boarding school and hardly ever saw his parents. So both he and his sister were at boarding school in England while their parents were working hard in India. And my father really suffered a lot because of that, hardly ever seeing his parents. My grandfather and his wife, they were both very concerned about other people's welfare, and they didn't like the idea of people having to be servants for them. Especially, they didn't like the idea of these rickshaws where they would be carried about by men running along, and they refused actually to use those services, and they always walked, but they did give the people money, and they even had shelters built for the rickshaw men so that they could be protected from the rain while they were waiting for customers. They were really concerned about how to improve the standard of living for the people, and how to improve food production so that people would have more food to eat. And they visited an agricultural school which had its own farm, and apparently they actually ended up planting mango trees there by themselves. When he finally came back to England, he and my grandmother had a house in Radlett, which is a small village north of London. And I do remember as a very small child being in the garden there, seeing my grandmother sitting on a garden chair with her right arm all wrapped up in big bandages, and I called her Granny with the bad arm. And when I was 3 years old, my grandmother died of skin cancer, which was very sad for my grandfather because they were really like a team. I think they were very close as a couple. He never married again. He never had even a girlfriend or any interest in another woman. And he gave up the house in Radlett and took a flat in central London, very close to the gentlemen-only Athenaeum Club, to which he walked every day and had lunch there. Women and children were allowed into the restaurant into the Athenaeum as guests. So sometimes my grandfather invited our family to go and have lunch there. I didn't actually think much of the food in the Athenaeum because my mother was a fantastic cook. But anyway, Granddad went there every day for lunch. And my father says he never learned to cook, although I do believe he may have sometimes cooked eggs for himself in the evening, because he said to me once, "You can do everything with an egg except lay it." He did have these funny little sayings and things that little jokes he would make every now and again. And then he would smile from ear to ear. And my dad went every Friday after work and cooked supper for him. Before Christmas, my granddad used to order a big wicker basket of Christmas goodies that would get delivered to our home in Wimbledon by an expensive food shop from central London. And the food things were always packed in straw, which my brother and myself found incredibly exciting, unpacking these Christmas goodies in the straw. And on Christmas Day, then my dad would go up to central London from our house in Wimbledon, collect Grandad spend the whole day with us. And after Christmas dinner, which was always very good, my Grandad used to sit down in my dad's big armchair by the fireplace, and then he would talk and talk and talk. He would reminisce endlessly about his time in India. I never remember him talking about anything else. It was always India, 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 and all these people and places that I had never heard of, and this terrible Mountbatten. I thought this Mountbatten was just some kind of ordinary kind of rogue character. He always seemed to be the bad guy in every story. And I found out later as an adult that he was actually Lord Mountbatten, was part of the British aristocracy and was actually my granddad's senior. The British elite didn't respect my grandfather, according to my mother, because he had come from an ordinary background. He hadn't come from an elite family. He hadn't been to expensive schools. And my grandfather apparently once overheard them talking about him behind his back. And they said, he's not one of us. My mother told me that the ordinary people in India really liked my grandfather. And this was proven to me one day when I was a teenager, and Granddad had just been visiting our house, and he had just left the front gate and was standing on the pavement, and he was about to get into my dad's car, and he was quite elderly by this time, so it was a little bit difficult. And Mr. Patel, our Pakistani neighbor, came out of his front gate at the same time and wished to assist my grandfather getting into the car. And my dad said to him, "This is my father, Sir Hugh Dow, who was in Karachi." And Mr. Patel was quite overwhelmed by this. And after the car drove off, my Mr. Patel turned to me and said, "Your grandfather is a wonderful man." Grandad wanted me to study medicine. He really tried to persuade me to study medicine, but I had already decided at the age of 9 that I wanted to be a vet. My dad really supported me in that. But later I heard from my mother that my dad's real ambition for me was that I should become the first female prime minister of the Labour Party, which would have been very disappointing for my grandfather because he was a staunch conservative. When I think about the legacy that my grandfather left, I think it would be amazing for him to know that there are now doctors from the Dow Medical College all over the world. And I've even met one in Vienna, and I met one in London. But I think the real legacy that my grandfather would like to leave is not only being a good doctor, but being a good person as a doctor, caring for the patients, treating everybody with kindness and respect, regardless of their status, regardless of their background, because that's really the kind of person my grandfather was. And that's why I actually love him and admire him so much.